Chapter 2. Speaking of growing up, we now cast our gaze on Enshli's childhood. It was a healthy one, not dissimilar to the upbringings of other Neanderthals. His father taught him the basics of nature, introducing him to flora and fauna that inhabited the land. He would bring Enshli to the forest, where they practiced fruit gathering and the identification of poisonous plants. When they saw the occasional deer, Enshli would ask for permission to help hunt it down. Every time, his father refused, softly patting him on the back.
Maybe when you grow bigger and stronger,
Was always the reply. Every time, Enshli would puff his cheeks out and give a pout, his eyes locked on the unsuspecting creature. There were times when they came across a predator, lurking noiselessly amongst the undergrowth. Even its mere presence would leave Enshli cowering in fear, his skinny legs shivering like a leaf in the breeze.
Don't be afraid.
His father would say.
Make yourself big.
And somewhat reluctantly, Enshli would inflate his chest and stand on his tiptoes. Then the father and son would back off slowly, careful not to divert their gaze from the loitering beast. On certain days, when thunderstorms were rife and lightning was aplenty, the duo would venture out, searching for fire. Sometimes thunder would roll and rain wouldn't fall. This presented them with a terrific opportunity. They would sniff the air looking for traces of smoke. Once a whiff was detected, they would hurry towards the source and break off a bunch of branches. These wooden bundles would be stuck into a roaring blaze and set alight. And they would hurry back afterwards, protecting their hard-earned flames with their dear life. Inside the cave, Enshli would sit at his father's side. He would watch as his father picked up pieces of flint or obsidian. Holding a chunk in each hand, he would pummel one against the other, aiming at their sides. Flakes flew everywhere, littering the ground with bits and pieces. The sound of scraping rang through the air. The noise was unpleasant, and sometimes the dust would seep into his nostrils, but Enshli watched on. As his father chipped away, a shape would start to form. Soon, a sharpness would emerge at its edges, allowing the once blunt pieces to easily pierce through any piece of flesh. It was then his father would stop to admire his handiwork before fastening it to a rigid wooden staff. It was a long and arduous process, but it was necessary for the hunt. And hunting his father would go. When food reserves dwindled, his father and the rest of the men would pick up their weapons and head off. Sometimes, when big game was afoot, even the women would join in. Enshli would be left back, but he was not alone. Apart from the occasional elder, there were other children to keep him company. They laughed and frolicked, playing games under the sun. With massive grins, they would run around and fool around. They had fun as all kids do. When the grown-ups returned with the prey, the little ones would gather around, oohing and ahhing and salivating while their stomachs growled with hunger. All 22 members of the tribe would sit in a circle, chomping down on a delicious feast. As the years came and went, Enshli grew into a teenager. He was no longer the tender, fragile child he once was, and his father treated him accordingly. True to his word, Enshli was allowed to hunt. He crafted his own weapon, and armed with it, he would set off as part of the crew. On most days, they would target medium-sized prey. Different kinds of deer were always welcome, with red deer being frequently on the menu. Other creatures, like wild horses and aurochs, kind of now extinct cattle, weren't safe from their copious appetite either. During the hunt, they would sneak soundlessly behind pieces of shrubbery and mimic the hunting strategies of the apex predators. Sometimes they would use the wind direction to their advantage, so not even the keen noses of their hapless prey could detect their existence. They would also split into several groups. One would deliberately expose themselves to the prey, forcing it to flee, while others would lie in wait, spears at the ready. When the unsuspecting prey closed in, they would lunge, aiming their spears at its soft, delicate underbelly. It was a rather surefire method, and it took a lot of planning. Enshli loved being a part of the first group. Once the prey darted off, he would give chase. As he hit the ground running, the wind would rush past his face and the muffled thuds of his feet would ring in his ears. His heart would pound so vigorously, the thumping would resonate throughout his whole being. This is it, he thought. This is what it means to be alive. But even that would pale in comparison to one particular type of hunt. This was the hunt that was the most laborious, the most vicious, the most exhilarating. It was the hunt for the mammoths. A hunt to bring down even the mightiest of gods. Since Enshli was young, he was told to fear the mammoths, especially the woolly mammoth, the undisputed king of the elephants. From afar, those lumbering beasts looked harmless. They would trundle in herds amongst the trees, their trunks swaying gracefully with every step. Gentle giants, one would assume, judging just from a quick glance. And while this wasn't entirely wrong, once up close, that opinion would certainly waver. These behemoths stood to a height reaching 3.4 meters, or 11.2 feet, and grew to a maximum weight of 6 metric tons. Their prolonged tusks curved at wide angles and ended in a wicked tip. Every time they moved, deep tremblings would sound underneath, and the very soil they trod on would shift in tandem. They were majestic, but petrifying all the same. But still, there was one thing that frightened Enshli even more than a mammoth. No, it was not 2 mammoths, that was a given. And that was an enraged mammoth. When thrown into a blind burst of fury, it would charge forward at terrifying speeds. In front of its stupendous weight, everything in its path would be reduced to nothing. Tree trunks would bend and break, shrubs would be uprooted from the dirt, and living beings, well, it's better not to talk about it. Their tusks weren't just for show either. Being impaled by one was basically a death sentence. Yet, these mammoths weren't invincible, and the tribe exploited this fact. Sometimes, a mammoth would be separated from its herd. Perhaps it had become too weak to keep up. Perhaps it had been exiled. Perhaps it was simply lost. Either way, this presented a golden opportunity. With Enshli's father and son duo in the vanguard, every adult would set out on this glorious hunt. Spread out in an orderly fashion, they would surround the mammoth, and with a fearsome battle cry that bled with bloodlust and vigor, they would direct the heads of their spears towards the stranded beast. These spears would plunge deep into its legs again and again, in an attempt to bring the brute to its knees. In the midst of war, the mammoth would fight back viciously. A battle cry of its own would blast out from its trunk, sending sound waves so powerful Enshli's eardrums would ring and his head would feel light. It would then stand on its hind legs before bringing them down to deliver a crushing blow. Even still, in the presence of such overwhelming might, not a single person would back down. The flurry of attacks continued. Soon, the green grass would be stained red with blood, and the movements of the mammoth would start to dull. With a final cry, its maimed legs would buckle under its weight, and it would slump to the ground. Seizing this opportunity, the entire party would go for the kill, and just like that, the hunt was over. Soon, everyone would be set for weeks. The abundant mounds of flesh would serve as a towering store of food. The hide would serve as primitive blankets and clothing. The bones would serve as tools and structures for settlements if needed. No part of the mammoth would go to waste. The colossal creature was a ferocious god, yes, but also a bountiful god. It was a time of peace.